Hello guys, how are you? Hope you all are good. Welcome to my channel Sci-Fi X. Don't forget to like, comment and share this video. Enjoy the video.
They auctioned a 5,000-year-old alien ship for $10. A human mechanic turned it into a Galactic Power Part 1. The auctioneer's voice cracked over the speaker like a bad radio signal. Lot number 417. One derelict vessel of unknown alien origin. Starting bid, $10. Do we have $10? Cal Mercer raised his hand. Nobody else did. The room was a converted warehouse on the edge of Tucson, half filled with scrap dealers, curiosity hunters, and two bored government observers who had already stopped taking notes. The ship sat in the lot behind the building on a flatbed trailer, wrapped in yellow caution tape like someone had gift-wrapped a disaster. It was roughly the size of a city bus, asymmetrical in a way that made the eye slide off it. Covered in carbon scoring so thick it looked like someone had painted it black with a brush made of fire. The auctioneer coughed. Sold. $10. Cal walked to the payment table. He handed over a crumpled bill and signed a form that released the Galactic Commerce Authority, the United Earth Government, and approximately 11 other organizations from any liability related to, quote, biological contamination, dimensional instability, or temporal irregularities. He signed without reading it. His buddy Dan Kowalski, standing 3 steps behind him, read every word and went pale. Cal, it says temporal irregularities. What does that mean? It means nobody knows what it does, Cal said. Which means I can figure it out. Dan was 26, 2 years younger than Cal, and had been following Cal into bad decisions since they were kids in Albuquerque building illegal go-karts in the wash behind Dan's house. He had learned to trust Cal's instincts the hard way. He also carried antacids everywhere they went together, which told its own story. Cal Mercer was not a scientist. He held no degrees. His resume, if you could call it that, listed 9 years as a diesel mechanic, 2 years on an offshore oil platform, 1 year doing maintenance on atmospheric processors in the Mojave, and a 6-month stretch nobody talked about involving a decommissioned military drone facility in Nevada. He had the hands of someone who had spent his life pulling broken things apart and deciding, on instinct alone, whether they could be put back together. He stood in front of the ship that evening, after the flatbed had been driven to his yard outside of town, and he looked at it for a long time without touching it. The shape was wrong in a way he could not explain. Not wrong like broken. Wrong like it had been designed by something that did not share human assumptions about how space worked. There were no obvious seams. No visible bolts or welds. The hull appeared to be a single continuous piece of material that was neither metal nor ceramic, but something that felt, when he finally pressed his palm flat against it, like pressing your hand against the side of a sleeping animal. Warm, faintly alive. Dan said, from a safe distance, I want you to know I am documenting this for when someone asks how I died. Cal did not answer. He was already walking around the back of the hull, looking for a way in. The first access point he found was not a door. It was a depression in the hull about the size of a dinner plate, perfectly smooth, with a faint geometric pattern pressed into it. He studied it for 11 minutes, tilted his head, and pressed his thumb into the center of the pattern. The hull opened, not like a door, like a question being answered. The material folded away from his thumb in a spiral pattern, pulling inward, revealing a passage about 4 feet in diameter, lit by a dim amber light that came from no visible source. Dan made a sound that was not a word. Cal got down on one knee and looked inside. The passage curved gently to the left, and along its walls ran lines of something that pulsed slowly, like breathing, in colors that had no human names. "It's on," Cal said. "It's been sitting in a government lot for 3 years," Dan said. "How is it on?" "It was waiting." "For what?" Cal looked back at him. "Someone who would open it." He went inside. The interior was not what the exterior suggested. The passage opened into a central chamber that should not have fit inside the external dimensions of the ship. It was large enough to stand in, large enough to move around in, with a curved floor that was oddly comfortable under his boots, like walking on compressed earth. Around the walls, hundreds of components were nested into organic-looking recesses, each one distinct, each one clearly part of a larger system that Cal could not yet read. In the center of the room, raised slightly from the floor, was a seat. It was sized for something taller than a human. The proportions were off, but it was unmistakably a pilot's seat, oriented toward a dark curved panel that filled the front wall. Cal sat in it. The panel lit up, not explosively, not dramatically. It lit up the way a computer screen lights up when you wake it from sleep. Steady, patient, waiting for input. He did not understand a single symbol on the display. They were not letters. So, they were not numbers. They were shapes that moved slightly when he looked at them directly, like they were aware of being observed. He stared at them for a long time. Then he pulled a notebook from his jacket pocket and started drawing. Part 2. 3 weeks after Cal first sat in the pilot's seat, he had filled 4 notebooks and had not slept more than 4 hours in any given night. The kitchen table in his house was buried under printouts, hand-drawn diagrams, and 3 half-eaten bags of chips that Dan kept restocking on the theory that if Cal died of starvation, Dan would feel responsible. The ship had power. That much was clear. The amber light never dimmed. The panel never went dark. Somewhere inside the hull, something was generating energy in a way Cal could not measure with any tool he owned, because every measuring device he had brought near the ship had either given nonsense readings or simply stopped working until he moved it away. He had identified 7 distinct systems by pattern alone. The way an experienced mechanic learns to hear a bad bearing before he can see it, Cal had learned to read the ship by feel, by the rhythm of its pulses, by which areas of the hull grew warmer when he activated certain panel sequences, by what the seat did to his posture when specific clusters of symbols were engaged. System 1 was propulsion. He was almost certain. System 2 was some kind of shielding or containment, and the material of the hull responded to it, becoming subtly denser under his palm. System 3 he called the library. When he activated it, the front panel filled with visual data, images and diagrams, and moving sequences that appeared to be records. History. Documentation of some kind. He could not read any of it. What he could do was recognize structure, grammar. The ship's language had patterns. You and Cal had a brain that was wired for patterns in the same obsessive way some people are wired for music. He had been taking engines apart since he was 11 years old, and every engine had its own logic, its own internal grammar of cause and effect. This was not so different. It was just a grammar built from a civilization that had been gone for 5,000 years. The breakthrough came on day 22, and it came because of a stripped bolt. He had been trying to access a secondary compartment near the aft section, and one of the recessed components had a fastener that was not threaded in any pattern he recognized. He had tried 12 different tools. He was sitting on the floor of the ship with the component in his lap, turning it over, when he realized the threading was not designed to be turned. It was designed to be compressed and then released in a specific sequence, like a lock that used pressure instead of rotation, or he pressed the sequence. The component opened, Inside was a smaller device, roughly the size and shape of a thick hardcover book, made of the same warm material as the hull. Its surface was covered in the same moving symbols as the main panel. But unlike the main panel, this device was clearly designed to be held, designed to be touched. The symbols responded to his fingerprints, shifting and rearranging when he pressed them. Cal spent 6 hours with the device before he understood what it was. It was a translation matrix, not complete, not comprehensive, but functional for basic operational commands. It had been designed, as far as he could tell, for exactly this purpose: to be found by someone who did not speak the ship's language, and to give them enough to start. Which raised the question of why a 5,000-year-old alien ship had been built with a tool for teaching its language to strangers. He brought Dan inside to show him. Dan stood in the central chamber and turned slowly in a full circle, taking in the walls, the ceiling, the pilot's seat, the still glowing panel. He had been inside twice before, but both times had been brief. Now he stood still long enough to actually look. "It's beautiful," Dan said quietly, which was not a word Dan used often. "It was built to be found," Cal said. "That's what I think. I think whoever made this built it expecting that someday someone who didn't know the language would open it. And they wanted that person to be able to fly it." Dan looked at him. "Why?" "I don't know yet." Cal held up the translation device. "But I'm going to." He started with propulsion, using the translation device as a reference, cross-checking symbols against the patterns he had already mapped in his notebooks. He spent the next 4 days constructing a working, operational vocabulary. Not fluent, not even close, but enough to issue commands, enough to read basic system status, enough to know when something was wrong versus when something was working. On day 27, he powered up the propulsion system for the first time. The ship did not move. He had not asked it to move. He simply activated the system and let it run at idle, feeling the vibration change in the floor under his boots, listening to the new quality of the hum that filled the chamber. Dan was outside with a video feed and a fire extinguisher. "Almost nothing's on fire," Dan reported, "but the ground around the ship is doing something." "What kind of something?" "The dirt is rising, like in a ring, about 6 inches off the ground, just floating there." Cal looked down at the panel. The propulsion readout showed something he had tentatively translated as stable field engagement. The ship was generating a gravitational containment field. It was not lifting. It was testing, feeling out the space around it the way a horse tests uncertain ground before committing its weight. He ran it for 11 minutes and powered it down. Dan came inside. His eyes were bright. "Cal, that was a gravity drive." "Yeah." "Actual gravity manipulation." "Yeah." Dan sat down on the curved floor. "The patents alone?" "No," Cal said. Dan looked up. "We're not patenting this," Cal said. "We're not selling it. We're not handing it over." He looked at the translation device in his hands, then at the panel, then at the seat. Whoever built this left it here on purpose, left it running, left a translation tool so whoever found it could learn to use it. He paused. They didn't leave it for a corporation. Dan was quiet for a long moment. "So what do we do with it?" Cal sat back down in the pilot's seat. The panel responded immediately, symbols rearranging around the areas he had learned. "When we learned to fly it," he said. "All of it. Every system. And then we figure out what it was meant to do." Outside, the Tucson desert sat still and hot under the afternoon sun. Nobody knew what was parked in Cal Mercer's yard. Nobody knew what he had paid $10 for. Nobody knew that a human mechanic with grease under his fingernails and 4 notebooks full of alien grammar had just successfully started the engine of a ship that had been waiting, patient and warm and alive, for 5,000 years. Part 3. The Galactic community became aware of Cal Mercer in the worst possible way for them, completely by accident and far too late to do anything about it. The incident that announced him was called, in the dry language of the Interstellar Commerce Authority's official report, an unauthorized gravitational event over the Sonoran Desert. What it actually was, Cal had taken the ship up, not high, not far. 40 feet off the ground, hovering over his own property, for 3 minutes and 11 seconds. But the gravity drive, at even minimal output, generated a signature that 17 separate monitoring systems across 6 star systems were built to detect. The ICA had been scanning for that exact signature for 200 years, ever since an archaeological team had cataloged the ship's disappearance from the records of the Veth archive. Within 4 hours of Cal's test flight, the ICA had a lock on the ship's location. Within 24 hours, they had dispatched an enforcement relay vessel with instructions to recover the artifact and detain any biological entities in possession of it. The ERV arrived in Earth orbit in 6 days. Its commander was a Veth officer named Sorek, who had the patient, measured manner of someone who had been enforcing galactic property law for 40 years and had never once encountered a situation that surprised him. He opened a communication channel to Earth's Unified Contact Bureau and explained, very politely, that humanity was in possession of a classified Veth historical artifact and that it needed to be surrendered immediately and without incident. Earth's government, to their credit, escalated immediately. A 3-person delegation arrived at Cal's yard in black vehicles before sunrise. 2 of them were lawyers. The 3rd was a woman named Linda Park from the Office of Extraterrestrial Affairs, who wore flat shoes and had the expression of someone who had been woken at 3 a.m. Amran was processing it with professional calm. She looked at the ship on Cal's flatbed. Then she looked at Cal. "You bought this at auction," she said. $10, Cal confirmed. "And you've been working on it. For about 5 weeks. And you flew it. 40 feet. For 3 minutes." Linda Park looked at the ship again for a long time. Then she looked back at Cal. "The Veth are claiming it's theirs. 5,000-year-old Veth archaeological artifact. But they say we're in violation of the Recovered Heritage Statute." "Is that a real law?" Dan asked from behind Cal. "In galactic law, yes," Linda said. "In Earth law, it has no jurisdiction. However, the Veth have an enforcement vessel in orbit, so the legal question has a practical dimension." Cal said, "How big is the vessel?" "Approximately 4 times the mass of this ship." Cal nodded slowly. "Can I talk to them?" Linda blinked. "Directly?" "Yeah." She made 3 phone calls, and it took 1 hour and 40 minutes. Then she handed Cal a tablet with an open communication channel and a live video feed showing the interior of the ERV's bridge. Sorek's face filled the screen. He had the angular, pale features of the Veth, with eyes that were a deep, steady amber. And he looked at Cal with the precise, neutral expression of someone who was deciding how much patience to extend. "You are the individual in possession of the artifact," Sorek said, and his translator rendered his words in clear, accented English. "I bought it legally," Cal said. "From a licensed Galactic Commerce Authority auction. I have a receipt." A pause. "The item was listed in error. It should not have been made available for sale. But it was, and I bought it. And in the 5 weeks since, I've gotten it running, figured out 7 of its primary systems, mapped its operational language, and taken it up to 40 feet. Cal held up the translation device. This was inside it. Why would a ship that's been sealed for 5,000 years have a live, functional tool for teaching its language to whoever found it? Sorek's expression shifted. Not dramatically, but something moved behind those amber eyes. "Where did you find that?" he said. "Secondary compartment, aft section, behind a compression lock fastener." Silence on the channel. Then Sorek said very carefully, "That device was not in the original manifest." "I know," Cal said, "that because whoever put it there didn't want it in the manifest." Another silence. Longer. Linda Park was standing 2 feet behind Cal, and he could feel her very carefully not reacting. Sorek said, "We will need to discuss this further, in person." "Fine," Cal said. "Come down." Dan made a noise. Cal ignored it. Sorek came down the next morning in a shuttle that landed in the open desert 2 miles from Cal's property, because it was too large for the yard. And then he arrived with 2 aides and no weapons, which Cal took as a good sign. He was taller in person than on screen, and he moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had spent his life in low-gravity environments. He stood in front of the ship and was still for a long time. Then he said, in a voice that had lost most of its official neutrality, "It is intact." "Mostly," Cal said. "There are 3 systems I haven't cracked yet, and 1 component that was damaged before I got it. Looks like something hit it from the outside about 3,000 years ago, based on the oxidation pattern." Sorek turned to look at him. "You dated the impact from oxidation. Ballpark estimate? Could be off by a few centuries. Our own archaeologists dated it to 2,800 years ago." Cal shrugged. "So I was close." Sorek studied him with those amber eyes. "You have a formal education in archaeology, material science, xenolinguistics?" "I'm a mechanic," Cal said. Sorek was quiet for a moment. "You identified 7 systems. 7 primary. There are at least 4 secondaries I haven't mapped yet. Our last team to study this vessel identified 4 systems total, in 3 years of study." Cal said nothing. He was watching Sorek's face. Sorek said slowly, as if working something out, "The Veth who built this ship were not the government. They were a separate group, researchers, explorers. They left before the collapse." He paused. And the translation device was not in the government's records because the builders never told the government it existed. They built it for whoever came next. "For whoever found the ship and could actually use it," Cal said. "Yes. Someone like me." Sorek looked at him for a long time. "Someone exactly like you." He turned back to the ship. "The Heritage Statute gives us the right to reclaim artifacts of Veth origin. But it does not address the question of artifacts that were intentionally left for non-Veth discovery." He folded his hands behind his back. "I will need to consult with the archive." "Take your time," Cal said. "I'll be here." He was already thinking about the 3 systems he hadn't figured out yet. Part 4. The Veth Archive sent its response in 12 days. It came not through Sorek, who had returned to his vessel, but through a formal channel directly to Earth's Unified Contact Bureau in the form of a 16-page document that 3 separate legal teams spent 48 hours reading. The short version, the Heritage Statute, did not apply. The long version, because the translation device constituted evidence of intentional transfer of ownership by the original builders, the ship fell into a legal category called voluntary abandonment with directed discovery, which under Veth foundational law gave primary custodial rights to the discovering party. Linda Park delivered this news to Cal in his kitchen, sitting across from him at a table still covered in notebooks, eating the only available food, which was leftover pizza, because Cal had not been to a store in 11 days. "You own it," she said, "legally, under both Earth law and Veth law." Dan, from the couch, said nothing. He was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone doing math they didn't like the answers to. Cal said, "What does Sorek think?" "Sorek filed a supplementary report to the archive recommending the ruling," Linda said. "He described you as, and I'm quoting, a technical intuitive of an order not previously documented in post-Veth biological records." "That's a compliment," Dan said from the couch. "It's a classification," Cal said. "What does it mean in practice?" Linda set down the pizza. "It means the Veth want to talk to you. Not the government, not a team of scientists. You. The archive is requesting a formal meeting, which would require you to travel to the Veth home station, which is 42 light years away." She paused. "In a ship that you've had for 6 weeks and have flown once, 40 feet off the ground." Cal looked at the translation device on the table. He had been working with it for 3.5 weeks now, and his operational vocabulary had expanded from basic commands to something approaching functional conversation with the ship's navigation system. He had cracked 2 of the remaining 3 unidentified systems. One was a long-range communication array. The other was what he could only describe as a memory, a recording system that stored operational history, and it had been running the entire time the ship had been sitting in government storage, quietly logging every interaction, every test, every person who had gotten close enough to trigger its proximity sensors. The ship had been watching, filing away everything it learned, getting ready. The third system was still dark. He could see it on the panel, a cluster of symbols that pulsed differently from the others, slower, deeper, like a heartbeat that was not quite in rhythm with the rest of the ship. He had a theory about it. He hadn't tested the theory yet because the translation device, when he brought the symbols up, responded in a way he had come to recognize as a warning. Not danger, not stop. More like not yet. He told Linda, "I'll need 2 weeks." She looked at the notebooks. "To prepare?" "To finish." He worked without stopping in any meaningful way. Dan brought food, and Cal ate it standing up or sitting in the pilot's seat or on the floor of the central chamber with a notebook on one knee and the translation device on the other. He mapped every secondary system. He ran propulsion tests at increasing altitudes, 50 feet, 200 feet, half a mile, and learned what the gravity drive felt like at different output levels, the way he had learned the sound of a healthy engine versus a struggling one. He plotted the navigation system for the first time, on pulling up star maps that covered a region of space vast enough to make his eyes water if he looked at them too long. The ship's navigation database contained records of 42,000 charted systems. Earth was in there, labeled, with notes. The notes were in the ship's language, and his translation vocabulary was not yet good enough to read them fully. But he caught fragments, words that translated roughly as persistent, inventive, underestimated. On day 12, he figured out the third system. It was not a weapon. He had half expected a weapon, and the revelation that it was not one settled something in his chest he had not known was tense. The third system was, as best as he could translate it, a broadcast. Not communication, not navigation. Something older and more fundamental. When he activated it at low power, the ship sent a signal outward in all directions simultaneously, a signal that carried, encoded in its structure, the complete operational record of the ship, where it had been, who had touched it, what it had done, and what had been done to it. An autobiography, broadcasting itself to anyone who could receive it. He powered it down after 45 seconds because he did not yet know who was listening. On day 14, he told Linda he was ready. She asked if he wanted a government escort vessel. He said no. She asked if he at least wanted someone to go with him. He looked at Dan. Dan was already packing a bag. They left before sunrise on a Tuesday. No announcement, no press. Cal had been careful about that. The only people who knew were Linda, Sorek, and a mechanic named Pete Garza back in Albuquerque, who Cal had called 3 days earlier and asked to cover his shop appointments for the next few weeks. Pete had asked no questions. He was that kind of mechanic. The lift was clean. 40 feet became 400. 400 became 4 miles. And the sky went from blue to dark at the edges, then fully dark, then absolute. The stars came out all at once. Dan sat in a secondary position Cal had rigged along the left wall, strapped in with a harness he had fabricated himself, and for a long time said nothing. The earth curved below them, white and blue, and then it was small, and then it was behind them. Cal set the navigation for the Veth home station and engaged the drive at 30% output. The ship moved the way he had suspected it would. Not like a rocket, not like a thrust, but like the universe had simply decided to rearrange itself slightly so that the destination was closer than it had been before. Smooth, absolute. The stars did not streak. They simply became different stars. Dan said softly, "Holy cow." "Yeah," Cal said. The trip took 9 hours, which was about 8 hours and 50 minutes faster than any human vessel could have managed, until they came out of transit in a region of space that looked, to Cal, like someone had filled the sky with cities. The Veth home station was not a planet, but a constructed ring, vast and detailed and lit from within, orbiting a pale star that gave off light the color of old amber. 3 vessels came out to meet them immediately, not aggressively, formally. An escort. Sorek's voice came through the communication array. "Welcome. You made good time." 9 hours, Cal said. A pause. "Our best transit vessels take 11. The drive was running rough on the transition sequence, Cal said. "I think there's an efficiency loss in the 3rd phase cycling. I want to look at it before the return trip." A longer pause. "You identified an efficiency loss in the Veth long transit drive after flying it once. 9 hours to diagnose," Cal said. "I'll fix it in 2. Sorek did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice had something in it that sounded, through the translation, almost like laughter. "Come in, Mechanic Mercer," he said. "They are waiting for you." Part 5. The archive was not what Cal had pictured. He had pictured something old and dim, a museum with the lights turned low, all glass cases and hushed voices. What he found was a working facility, loud with the sound of active research, full of Veth moving with purpose through corridors lined floor to ceiling with active data panels. And it smelled like electricity and something faintly sweet, like heated metal with a note of something organic underneath it. Sorek walked them through it without ceremony, which Cal appreciated. The Veth who met them at the archive's central chamber were not officials. They were engineers, 6 of them, older and younger, and they looked at Cal with a focused attention that he recognized from the way good mechanics look at a problem they have not been able to solve. Not hostility. Hunger, when the lead engineer was a woman named Varek, and she wasted no time. "You found the translation device," she said. "Compression lock compartment, aft section," Cal confirmed. 4 archive teams examined that ship in the 3 years before the auction. None of them found it. They were looking for something they expected to find, Cal said. I was looking for something that didn't fit. Varric studied him. Explain. The hull is one continuous piece. No seams, no welds. But the aft section has a slight thermal differential that reads about 3 degrees warmer than the surrounding material when the ship is at idle. That's either damage or a fastener. I tested for damage first, found no stress indicators, so I tested for a fastener. Took 12 attempts to figure out the compression lock mechanism. Varric turned to the engineer beside her and said something in Veth that the translation device rendered approximately as. He found it by heat signature, and the teams we sent were xenoarchaeologists, she said, turning back to Cal. They did not think to check thermal differentials. They probably didn't have their hands on the hull long enough, Cal said. You have to hold it, feel it. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically, but Cal felt it, the way he felt a room change when people stop deciding how much to trust someone, and just decided. Varric pulled up a display on the central panel, and it showed a schematic that Cal recognized. The ship. Every system rendered in precise Veth notation. There are 17 ships, Varric said. Cal went still. This is the only one that has been recovered intact, Varric continued. The others were destroyed, lost, or are in locations we cannot reach under current political restrictions. She looked at him steadily. The group that built them was called the Unbound. They were researchers who left Veth civilization before the collapse, 5,000 years ago. They built these ships and they seeded them, intentionally, across multiple systems, each one designed to be found, each one with a translation device hidden in a location that required hands-on mechanical intuition to locate. She paused. Not scientific training, not academic knowledge. Mechanical intuition. Dan, very quietly, said, They were looking for mechanics. They were looking for a specific kind of mind, Varric said. One that interacts with systems through touch and pattern recognition rather than theory. The Veth are a theoretical species. We model before we build. We have not, in our recorded history, produced anyone who thinks the way you do. She folded her hands. The Unbound believed that the civilization that would come next, after the collapse, would need something different. Not more theory, more hands. Cal looked at the schematic. 17 ships, 1 recovered. The other 16, he said. Do you have their last known locations? We do. And the political restrictions on some of them. What are we talking about? Varric's expression became careful. 3 are in consortium-controlled space. The consortium does not permit independent recovery operations. But they permit commercial salvage with proper licensing. A pause. Technically. And you said the ship is legally mine. Under Veth foundational law, yes. Cal looked at the schematic for another moment. But then he looked at Sorek, who was standing to the side with his arms folded and an expression that was doing its level best to remain neutral and not quite managing. I want the location data for all 16, Cal said. And I want to talk to someone about a commercial salvage license. Varric said slowly, You intend to recover them yourself. I intend to recover them, Cal said. Whether I do it alone depends on what I find. The room was quiet. Outside the archive's viewports, the ring station stretched away into amber-lit distance, vast and detailed, the accumulated architecture of a civilization that had survived the collapse of its own world and rebuilt in space. It was extraordinary. And somewhere in 16 other systems, ships made by the people who had chosen to leave all of this behind were still waiting, warm and patient, for someone with the right kind of hands. The consortium will not cooperate, one of the other engineers said. Not a warning. A fact. Most things don't cooperate until they have to, Cal said. He spent 3 days at the archive. He fixed the efficiency loss in the transit drive in 4 hours, not 2, which bothered him slightly, and then identified 2 additional optimization points that the archive's own engineering team had not cataloged. They watched him work with the focused attention of people seeing something they had no framework for. He did not explain his methods because his methods did not have language. When he felt the system, he heard where it was spending energy it did not need to spend. He adjusted. When he and Dan left, the ship's transit efficiency had improved by 11%. Varek came to see them off. She handed Cal a data chip. All 16 locations. The licensing documentation will be transmitted to Earth's Commerce Bureau within 48 hours. Cal pocketed the chip. Thank you. The Unbound left a message, Varek said, in the ship's memory system. It was encrypted in a format that required the translation device to decode, which is why we never accessed it. She paused. We decoded it after you arrived, after we understood what kind of person the device was designed to select. Cal waited. It says, find the others, not for us, for what comes next. He stood with that for a moment. Yeah, he said. I will. The ship lifted clean off the docking pad, gravity drive humming at idle. The stars spread out in every direction past the viewport. 42 light years back to Earth. 16 ships waiting in systems he had never seen. A civilization that had been gone for 5,000 years, trusting that someone would show up eventually with enough sense to feel the heat differential in a hull and try 12 different tools until one of them worked. Dan broke the silence first, the way he always did. So, Dan said, when we get back, are you going to tell Pete he's covering the shop for longer than a few weeks? Pete already knows, Cal said. How? Because Pete's a mechanic, Cal said. He can read the room. He set the navigation for the first of the 16 locations instead of Earth. The universe rearranged itself. They were gone.